Hi, Savanah.
Hi, Ryan. What are we talking about today?
Today, we're talking about Painter of the Night, a Korean webtoon by the artist Byeonduck. I apologize for the extremely Western pronunciation of everything in this video. Please feel free to comment correct pronunciations. We did try our best. But anyway, back to you, Savanah. I think there's something you wanted to say.
Yeah, thank you for that, Ryan. I also would just like to preemptively apologize for any mispronunciation because I'm sure that there will be many. Really quickly, before we jump into everything, we just wanted to acknowledge the fact that we're going through some pretty crazy times politically here in the United States, considering this is a podcast where we like to talk about different political issues. Today is, what is the date today? It is January 15th, 2021. So we are filming this a little bit beforehand when people will be listening to it. But we are going through a possible impeachment proceedings right now. There was the insurrection last week. So lots of crazy stuff. And we just wanted to note that that is all going on in the background as we are filming this right now. So, yeah, anything you'd like to add to that, Ryan?
No, it sucks.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah.
So, anyways, back to something that I would much rather talk about. Smut. Dirty comics, yaoi, BL, boys love. That is what this webtoon is. It's about a painter who paints dirty paintings, who's kind of taken in by a noble during the Joseon era in Korea. So the era was between 1300 and 1600. And this noble is abusive, psychotic maybe. He has almost no redeemable qualities, and yet he's one of the hottest guys in Korea. I mean, you look at him in the way he's depicted, and it's clearly meant to be erotic. And I think it, for the most part, succeeds. So it does kind of take on that classic dominant and sub-dominant. I can't think of the word.
Submissive.
Savanah? Submissive, thank you. Kind of pairing that these types of comics tend to take on. So the genre in Korea is kind of under the umbrella term manhwa, which is just like manga, if you're looking for the Japanese parallel.
We also do want to give a trigger warning before we get too deep into what we're talking about, just for anybody who might struggle with abuse or hearing of different things of that nature.
Yeah, emotional abuse, physical abuse, and rape will be discussed. As well, I'd like to bring up spoilers all the way through chapter 25 will be discussed as well. So I don't think it's too spoiler intense for Painter of the Night, considering it's a comic that continues on. And we're just kind of taking a look at this as a case study for the genre. So keep that in mind as well.
So first, I think we were wanting to talk about a little bit of the influence of Japan, I believe. I think that you had some things that you wanted to talk about that, Ryan.
Yeah, so Japan occupied Korea. It was considered part of Japan. Korea was considered part of Japan all the way from 1910 to 1945. So that was a pretty long time, and that's how Korean comics have such a clear influence from Japanese comics, and that's when the art community started to really blossom, at least from what I found during my research. And I thought it was very interesting to find that the etymology of manhwa, so that's spelled manhwa, the Korean word for comic, is derived from the Chinese word for comic, which is spelled manhua, so manhwa. And both manga and the Korean word manhwa are derived from the Chinese word. So I thought that etymology was kind of fascinating. I don't know, I was really excited to discover that. I felt like I was cracking the case or something. I was like, look at this. Me connecting the dots for Asian history and art. Wow. I don't know. Did you think that was interesting? I thought I was so proud of myself when I found that out.
Well, actually, I took a class while I was at ASU, Arizona State University, that was an anime class. So I think I was aware of that. But actually, that was kind of fun for me because that's something that I hadn't really thought about, or like a lot of this stuff I hadn't really thought about in like any kind of critical way since I took that class. So I kind of felt like I was dusting off a lot of cobwebs while working on preparing for this.
Well, I had no idea I was talking to such a professional, a literary luminary when it comes to manga and Asian comics.
I am in fact an expert.
Thank you. So you guys are probably familiar with the term yaoi. If you're watching this, probably are. I would say 8 out of 10 of you. So yaoi is a subgenre of the Japanese genre for manga, shoujo. Savanah, do you know what shoujo manga is?
Yes, I do. It is anime or manga that is designed for girls.
There you go. So it is anime or manga designed for women, for girls, teens in particular. So it's your Fruits Baskets, it's your Ouran High School Host Clubs, it's your Lion Aprils. It's kind of your slice of life animes that are just more about the romance. They're lighter. I think there's a word in Japanese that's commonly used for just not really having very much substance or meaning. I apologize. My dog is whining like crazy. He's lying down now. Okay.
Also, in case it wasn't clear, I am not an expert in anime or manga, and I very much appreciate, as much as some of our other listeners and viewers might, of Ryan giving us a little explanation of what some of these terms are.
Yeah, because we're going to be using them loosely throughout this little talk here, and I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. So then came around yaoi, which is a subgenre of shoujo for women. So yaoi is also for women. And yaoi has pretty boys be in love with each other or in physical love with each other. So it's very... it hypes up the themes of homosexuality, unlike how it is in Japan right now, where I know that it's a very closeted atmosphere. So it's kind of like an escapism in that kind of field. So then there is BL, which is kind of like rebranded yaoi. Boys love. It's to sound less hardcore and to be more marketable. And interestingly enough, in America, we use yaoi more than BL, which I think is odd, considering that yaoi sounds more foreign and it sounds more hardcore, where BL sounds less hardcore. And Sven, you didn't even know what the term BL was, or that it was like, stood for boys love.
Yeah, correct. Just a question, I guess, or just a thought. Of that distinction of how we use yaoi here in the US versus BL, and I wonder if that has to do with some type of like mainstream, of like if it's more accepted in the mainstream in Korea versus here in the US. That would be a thought or a question about that.
Yeah, I don't know if they use the term yaoi in Korea.
Yeah.
I would like someone to tell us, right? Like, I'm not able to define like the colloquial terms that they use in Korea, because I live in America and I know the colloquial terms that we use here, but it's hard to know what they use outside of, where you live. Yeah. So I have no idea what terms. All I know is that for sure in Korea they do use the term BL or boys love. That is for sure what I know and what they use. In Japan, they do use the term yaoi and BL, both, or shonen AI. Which is boys love as well. And shonen anime is for boys. I think that got a little too confusing. So just to kind of lay it all out, yaoi, BL, all mean homosexual pairings of pretty boys. So that's kind of just the gist of it.
Yeah. Thank you for all of that information, Ryan. Is there anything else that you would like to add background-wise before we jump into talking maybe about some more specifics about this particular comic or about the genre in general.
I thought it was weird when I was doing research. I read an article that the American version of yaoi would be slash fiction. Savanah, what do you think about that?
I have never heard the term slash fiction, so I would love to hear about what that is so I can form an opinion.
Wow, really? So slash fiction, you're probably aware that it exists, but like I guess you don't know the term, is like putting two characters together in a fictional world. So like Harry and Draco slash fiction, or Harry Potter and Spock. Like,
I see.
It's like that. And it's usually not in comics. It's more in kind of written word. Mm-hmm. And those tend to be kind of in line with yaoi and BL themes. So themes of dominance and rape, but still kind of an emotional payoff where they come to an agreement at the end and cuddle, and there's still some kind of emotional payoff, even though there was none to start with. You know what I mean?
Right. So, rephrase your question to me again, now that I have more of an answer or understanding of what that means.
Yeah, so I read an article. It was by Eliza Strickland, and I can put it in the comment section below or in the notes. And she said that the American version of yaoi is slash fiction. What do you think about that?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like it's something that still isn't like so in the mainstream as I would imagine it is in other places, like in Japan or in Korea. But I don't know. I guess I do, like, if I think about like in the places where I first ever saw like content like that, like on Tumblr, I think is probably the first place that I ever saw content like that, like back in the day. I think that probably would be kind of akin to yaoi in a way. Like, I definitely see parallels there for sure.
Like, what kind of parallels?
Well, it's interesting. I haven't actually really thought about this, so I am thinking about it now for the first time. But I think that these kids are like really going at it right now. I'm sorry.
I actually do hear them. Yeah. Do you want to like take a 10-second like interval here to like collect your thoughts?
Yeah. Okay. All right. So back to your question. I think that I mean the main issue to me, I think that would be like the main difference between slash fiction and yaoi is that what is like the intent. Like, yaoi is very specifically pairing characters together, from my understanding at least. Like, if an author is choosing to pair these characters together, like there's some reasoning for that, versus fans or outside people who might be writing and pairing characters together who were not the intended ones, which I think there is a very interesting place for that, especially with like OTP culture or something like that. Mm-hmm. So I definitely think it's interesting, but I think that there are
what is OTP?
One true pairing.
Thank you. A term, and that means what? That you're trying to what? What does that term mean?
Well, my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding of it has always been that it's like these are the two who are really meant to be together, even if they're not together, like in the show. Like, I don't know why I always think of like Supernatural, because I feel like that's the most I've seen of it, of people talking about OTP, but to say like Dean and Castiel.
Oh, Savanah, that's a whole can of worms. Yes, that is a good example. Yeah. That is also my understanding. Please correct us if we're wrong. Okay. Moving on.
So I think if we want to move on from that, something that I found really interesting more in like the specifics of this story of Painter of the Night was the historical side, especially because with my limited amount of taking in of, well, this is the first time I ever read anything manhwa, but just kind of across the borders of manga, anime, manhwa, anything historical. I've never really have approached anything that's kind of historical in this way. And I watched a video that was an interview of Byeonduck, and she was saying that she wasn't really concerned about making it historically accurate. But in a lot of the research that I've done, just because I found it to be interesting to kind of look into this specific time period, it actually was pretty historically accurate, which I thought was really interesting. And I liked how the story really dove into kind of what the nobility of the time was, and the kind of like caste system, if you will, that they had between the lower class people and the upper class people. And I just, more than anything, I think I had an appreciation for feeling like I actually got to learn quite a bit about this history. And I really appreciated how in the comic the author took the time to put in little like asterisks of information, like when was this time period, what is a gisaeng, like different things like that. So I don't know. I'm curious to see if you've read anything also kind of historical, and if you found it to be accurate, or kind of what that field is like.
I'm wondering if it's like if we were to write a comic that took place during the 1400s of like, or I guess the 1800s, 1600s. How far does America go back again? Like America, the United States of America.
Yeah.
Like write it during colonial times, just with the knowledge off the cup of our head, right? Mm-hmm. And someone in Korea read it, and they did some preliminary research on America, like early history, and they would be like, seems pretty accurate. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure it's accurate to us, but in reality, if a Korean history professor were to read that, and I'm sure it's not at all one of those things. Because I wanted to bring up the top knot, the hairstyle in Korea. I did some very, very preliminary kind of research on this, and from what I find is that our understanding of it is from a white Christian missionary who went to Korea. So who knows if this is correct at all. Yeah. But the top knot symbolizes manhood and marriage. Like, you cannot have a top knot unless you're married. So I was curious if the kind of main love interest to our painter, Master Yoon, was married, or if that was a stylistic choice.
I also was very intrigued by the top knot, and I didn't do too much research into it, but even just like as a visual thing, like I feel like the top knot was very like phallic, and they would always like make these references of like, oh, how dare you grab my top knot, or he cut off his top knot, or things like that. So I found that just like symbolically to be very interesting as a device in the story.
Yeah, I thought so too. And like clearly we got the message that it is a symbol of masculinity and virility and all those words that are like that, right? We got that as readers, not knowing what it means.
Yeah.
But doing the research, it could also mean that you're married and you've transitioned on into your manhood. So I was like, is he married? Is it more erotic if he's married? Am I supposed to... I didn't know what to think, you know? I was kind of excited by the idea that he could be married, and like maybe that would pop up later. So yeah. That was kind of my thing on historically accurate. I think most things that I've read have been kind of fantasized historical. So nothing that strictly takes place during like an actual like historical time era. Besides historical fiction that's written in the U.S. I've not read anything outside of that besides like fantasy Japan or fantasy Korea. Those are the only things that I've touched.
All right, so back to kind of what I was saying, looking at the historical accuracy. This is kind of maybe more of an aside, but I would like to bring up just because I think it's interesting. Also, further backstory. What am I trying to say? I studied art history, so I kind of like nerded out a little bit on art history of this Korean time period because I was really curious to see if there were actual erotic paintings made during this time, and if that would be accurate. And there was two artists who were pretty well known. There was three artists in Korea during this time period, and they were called the Three Wands, and two of them were known for making erotic paintings. One of them was known more so for depicting like the common people in different erotic poses, but there was one in particular whose name was Haewon, and he very specifically painted like noble people like Master Yoon and gisaengs, or somebody akin to that. So there was actual paintings during this time period of almost exactly
I don't
like
think
this
we've
story,
defined
albeit they were
gisaeng
not-
yet. Could you do that for us?
Oh, yes. Yes. So the exact definition, let me grab my notes so that way I can have the exact definition. So a gisaeng, again, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, is a woman from an outcast or slave family who was essentially a courtesan. Courtesan meaning various different things. It could be somebody who is akin to a sex worker or a prostitute, or in this case, gisaengs. They typically provided artistic entertainment and conversation to people of a higher class than they were. So they would go talk to the noblemen, do paintings for them, just kind of talk to them. And they were revered as being artists who were educated, but they were still seen as being of a lower class. And so specifically in this story, our protagonist, he was raised by gisaengs. It doesn't say exactly that his mother was one, unless perhaps that comes on later in the story. It kind of sounds like he was just raised in a household by gisaengs. So this was not uncommon during this time period to have somebody actually come in and do things like painting for you. So I just found that to be very interesting. I don't know if you find that to be interesting at all, but I just felt like I wanted it to be noted that things like this did actually happen during the time
Gotcha.
period.
I mean, I feel like that makes sense in my Western brain for what I have read. You know what I mean? Like Game of Thrones, or I can't think of anything off the top of my head. But kind of the noble taking in the urchin, right, for whatever talents that they have is kind of a tale as old as time in my book, right? That's kind of like, I take pity on you, but I love your work. I feel like it's not an uncommon trope. And even in slash fiction, in kind of alternate universes, AU, as they are commonly called, that's kind of like a trope where, you know, people would be often put in, whether it be Captain Kirk and Spock, right? Like Spock is Kirk's slave or something like that. Unfortunately, I never got into fanfiction very much, and I feel like it's a huge undersight. I'm kind of ashamed of my lack of that knowledge.
Also, kind of interestingly, I read that there's not very much known about who, like, the people who were gisaengs during the Joseon era. Like, nobody was writing down their names because they're not important nobles. However, they are often centered in stories and literature, and they're often represented as like the heroines of the story. Which, thinking about Painter of the Night, I feel like I wouldn't necessarily describe our main character as being a heroine. Which is, I think, kind of like an interesting departure of like a typical telling of maybe what this story would be if it were not like a BL story. And I kind of like that it's like kind of a twist on that. I don't know. Would you think of him as being a heroine?
I mean, I'm rooting for him. I'm not sure. I don't think we've read enough to kind of understand his importance of the story other than being Master Yoon's kind of object of torment. And kind of just the vessel that we insert ourselves, or maybe we don't insert ourselves in as, oh goodness, now I'm totally blanking on Nakyum's name. I believe that's it. Give me one moment. Yeah. Nakyum, the painter. I don't know if we're supposed to insert ourselves as him since he is the more feminine boy as women reading it, or if we're supposed to identify as him. I don't think so. At least I didn't. I kind of just looked at him from as an outsider's perspective. But I was rooting for him, and if that's not kind of a heroine quality, then I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think that I didn't really insert myself into the story, and I was rooting for him. I think sometimes I got a little annoyed, I guess, by him in a way. I think if anything, I got annoyed just by the crying.
There was such pretty crying, though. I really liked the way the artist. I loved the wet faces and the pink and just. It was really well done. I really, the talent and the artistry was really well done, for my standard at least, for anyone's.
Yeah, no, I also really loved the color palette in it. I thought that was really beautiful, and the way that like the eyes were done, I thought was really beautiful, and I thought like I liked thinking about it just in a fun way of thinking about like, okay, how was Korean erotic art in the actual Joseon dynasty, and how has it evolved to this? Like, I would consider this story to be within that same canon, like how it has evolved from there to here.
So looking at this as a piece of homosexual erotica, which it's not even homosexual erotica, it's women's erotica, but it is homosexual. It can't be denied, right? It is men fornicating, lots of butt sex, lots of butt sex. And can we look at it as like escapism? You look at the current state of Japan or Korea, which I looked into a little bit, and I know what it's like here in America. I live here, and it's far from accepting. I mean, it's accepting, but is it accepting? I'm trying to describe the atmosphere, how it is in America, because I think it's similar as it is in Korea. In Korea, it was only outlawed as harmful and obscene in 2003, and they do have mandatory drafting in Korea, and we're talking about South Korea. And if they come out as gay, bisexual, if they have sexual preferences towards men, then it can be classified as a mental disability. They could be dishonorably discharged. So while it is not obscene, and it is more kind of in the public eye, and current surveys show that Korea is leaning more towards legalizing gay marriage, it's not yet fully accepted. And I find that extremely similar to how it is over here. While we did just pretty much legalize gay marriage, in a lot of places it's still not accepting. So how would you describe that environment? Because I'm having trouble like pinpointing how you would describe it.
Yeah, I think that here in the U.S., I feel like I can't speak as much to what it is like in South Korea because I'm not as well versed in that. But in the U.S., I think it is kind of like a blanket, like accepting, or at least like people kind of pretending that people are accepting. I think it's like more widely talked about, like the LGBT community, and I think a lot of people were just like, oh, now we can legally get married, like everything's fine now, discrimination doesn't exist. Like here in the US, I think a lot of our battles are still around like making sure that there is legislation in place so that people can't be discriminated against for housing or healthcare, or
donating blood,
greater expanding of our healthcare. Yeah, donating blood, or having even just like talking about gay sex, if we're going to talk about like sex education for kids, or just really anything. And I mean, clearly I think we both know people who have still like struggled with their families just even coming out and not being accepted by their loved ones, even though I think a lot of people like to pretend like here in the United States we're over that now, but I don't think we are. I think it still is definitely a big hurdle for people.
Yeah, and that's kind of I kind of get the vibe when I was reading about it, about Korea, that it's kind of like America in the 90s, I suppose, maybe even earlier than that, where it's kind of talked about. It's like, if you're a decent person, like, you'll vocally say, of course it's all right that it's okay to be gay, but you still can't be gay in the military, you still can't donate blood, you still can't get married, you know?
Right.
That's kind of the general sense that I get.
Yeah, and kind of along those lines of just even, I don't know to what extent just even talking about, like, sex or things of that nature, whether they are homoerotic or not, how things like that are accepted in South Korea. But I did find it interesting when I was looking at this particular, like, artwork, like that artist that I had mentioned. That artwork was just on display in an exhibition for, like, the very first time in 2013 in South Korea, and they actually had, like, an age restriction on who was allowed to go and view
the
that
artist of
within,
the
federal...
Joseon era, that one, the erotic painter. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. They had, like, an age restriction on who was allowed to go and see that artwork, and so I think that even in itself is kind of telling maybe a little bit about how just things of that nature in general are handled. And I can't say that we're that much better here in the U.S. because while we may not have age restrictions on who can go view artwork, we certainly do on movies, and even, like, in museums, like, they're not going to ask you how old you are, but they will put up a sign, like, warning you that there's nudity or something like that.
Yeah. It is kind of refreshing and shocking to read a comic. The first webtoon that I read was during the killing stalking phase. And that was kind of my first foray into BL and hardcore BL. And it was shocking and refreshing, right? It was like, wow, like, those bodies are just right there. They're going for it. Like, I'd never read anything like it.
Yeah, I think that was kind of my experience too, because I'd never read anything like this when I read Painter of the Night, and I didn't really know what to expect. And honestly, I think I was expecting it to be, like, more intense and more graphic, I think, just because of, like, maybe, like, the more intense things I've, like, happened upon on the internet or seen places. So I felt like I had an appreciation for how the, like, erotic and sex scenes were depicted in this comic, because I felt like it found, like, kind of, like, a balance of, like, showing these bodies and showing these acts that they were doing, but having it not be, like, off-putting for me in a sense, or feeling like it was, like, too much. And I wonder if that is because of the fact that it is made by a woman, and that's, like, the intended audience.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. It's really fascinating for me to think about how yaoi and BL is marketed towards women and in general written by women who are fans of the genre, and how in Japan there's a term for these women who love yaoi and BL. They're called fujoshis, and I can put the spelling up because editing. And it stands for rotten girl. Like, that's the literal translation of people of girls who like them. There's no term for, like, that for men, right? It's a woman and a girl's targeted market.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of a great segue into, no, we want to talk about really, like, who is the, like, intended audience of Painter of the Night. I personally thought it was interesting to really think about it, that I'm assuming that, well, actually, I don't know, I guess. I can't assume. I felt like I was wondering if it was more intended for a Western audience or for a more global audience. I definitely felt like it was intended for women, just based off of not just, like, the sex scenes, but also just, like, the emotionality of it and, like, the crying. Like, I did watch a video that was kind of reviewing it, and the girl was saying that she liked the crying. She liked how emotional the characters were in the story. And so I definitely felt like it was clear to me that the intended audience was women. It was less so clear to me if it was, like, a Western audience intended, or Korean, or Asian or
yeah, it's hard to tell, especially because we live in a world, we live in America, where so many people across the globe cater to us because we're the biggest buyers, right? You look at China, right? They cater towards us. You look at even the K-pop industry, right? They're always trying to break into America and try to sound more Western, including more and more English into their lyrics. And I wonder if it's also just as pervasive in the webtoon genre as well. So it's hard to know if it is supposed to be like really understood by Korean audiences or if it is kind of a catering attempt to Western audiences because we have the biggest wallet, you know?
Right. Yeah. Especially, I think it made me really wonder about it because I had never read like a webtoon, or this was my first introduction to that as really a medium. Even though I realized that I had heard about it before. I heard about webtoons when I was at New York Comic Con like 2 years ago, I think, or something. I just didn't know what it was. And I happened upon something that I saw from when I was there. And then I was like, oh, this was around then. It's not like necessarily just brand new right now. Which made me think that's probably a lot more prevalent and popular than
I think so. I think it is. I again stumbled upon it around 2016, I think is when I first stumbled around webtoons. And when I was doing some research, I found that webtoons are actually like directly linked to South Korea, because they're the ones that started the format of you continue scrolling and you pay coins, right? You use real money to buy fictional coins to pay for each kind of individual chapter. And that's the definition of webtoon, is that kind of currency format.
Which is something else that I thought was kind of interesting. I'd never read a comic not physically before. This was the first time I'd ever read something both on I used my phone and my computer to read it, which I liked. I'm not sure if I liked it better or worse than reading physically. I wonder how maybe the experience would have been different.
I know it's really popular to read it on your phone, and that's how this format gained so much popularity, is because it was so easy to read on your phone. So I definitely encourage everyone to go out there, and you kind of get like a free trial of each comic, gives you a certain amount of free episodes, and just like see what the format is like, because I really do think that it is a working format. Like it's very lucrative. Like it's really easy to keep scrolling, because you're scrolling. You're reading through the webtoon, and you hit the end point, and it doesn't tell you that you're out of coins, but it brings you to the pay website, right? It brings you there to like where you can pay and buy more of this in-store currency. And you're like, oh, I just need like 2 more coins. I'll just spend 99 more cents, and then I'll be able to read so and so many more chapters, and then I'll take a break. But it's just very easy to just keep going and just pay like a couple of dollars here and there to read the next couple of chapters.
Especially since they made it so each chapter or episode was 3 coins, but you buy them in increments of 2. Which I personally was annoyed by, but I can understand why they do that. And yeah, I definitely think I preferred reading it on the phone, which makes sense because now I know that it was more so designed to be on the phone. And I think that is kind of cool because I think that lends itself to being able to do a lot of different things, like visually. Like if it was printed on paper, you're like limited by maybe the payoff of the colors or different things like that, versus on a screen I think you have a little bit more flexibility with just like the artistic view of how they would be drawn. So
we read our comics on Lesin. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that name, but it seems like a popular platform for webtoons from what I could just find, right? It's always the top Google research. If I search BL, top Google research. If I search Yaoi, top Google research. You know what I mean? Like it's there. And because it is just on your screen, and like you can just take screen captures of it. Like you can just scroll through, take pictures. Definitely piracy, huge issue in the community. There's so many apps, so many websites that you could just go to and read illegally. It's just rampant, especially with teenagers who have no money of their own and they want to explore their own sexuality and explore what they like and read something different and not mainstream. And it's just huge, unfortunately.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely saw that because I was like, when I was just like Googling, just trying to like see more information, like all of the Google search results were like, how to read Painter of the Night free, how to illegally read Painter of the Night. Like that was like all of the top search results. So I can definitely see how that would be an issue. And I understand like why, like at the very beginning of the comic on at least the platform that we read it on, there was like a huge statement about not reproducing it, which, you know, is important as artists. Like she needs to be credited and get her money, because if it's that successful, she should reap the rewards. So I think kind of back to where we kind of sidetracked a little bit, but I think we kind of started talking a little bit about like really this juxtaposition between the Western audience and maybe a traditional Korean audience. And I know we wanted to talk about the rise of Korean culture within the US and globally, and how maybe webtoons are a part of that. And really, I don't know, I think there's a lot to unpack there about that whole process. So I don't know, I'd love to hear your thoughts about that, and then I can share maybe some of my thoughts about that.
It's really hard because I'm kind of an outsider looking in. Like I kind of dabble here and there. Of course there's some K-pop songs that I really like. Of course I like BTS. Of course I read an occasional webtoon, right? So it's hard because I'm not really entrenched in kind of the American Korean culture. And so I feel like I don't really have anything to say other than me, a normal person who, again, doesn't really even read that much content, listen to that much content, still notices like Korea's huge impact on my own culture. BTS plays on the radio now. It's not just Gangnam Style in 2009, right? Like we've moved past that.
I'm kind of in a similar boat where I am not like super entrenched in that. I just see like little bits here and there, and I think it was very clear to me like probably about like a year or two ago, like really seeing how big like BTS like took off like here in the United States, and now just like last year with Lady Gaga and Blackpink's collaboration that they did, like when that happened, I was like, wow, like this really is like really becoming mainstream here in the US. And I think a lot like along the lines with this comic and how it is erotic, it made me think a little bit about how in Western culture, especially in the US, we tend to have an issue with fetishizing Asian people. And I can only imagine that has to do in part with this rise of popularity of things like K-pop and other Korean media here in the US, but also like if you've ever looked at Pornhub or any other pornography website here in the West, like that is a very large portion of it. And I think it's interesting to see somebody who is Korean create erotic fiction and have it like I didn't necessarily feel like it was fetishizing like these people as Asian people or Asian bodies. And I don't know, I just thought it was interesting to kind of like hold those things together and like have that be a reference point. Like I'd never seen anything at all erotic like made actually from Asian people. Probably I probably have only ever seen things made by Western people who are like contributing to that,
like Kill Bill or something like that, right? Like
yeah, stuff like that. So I don't know, I just thought that was interesting. Also, I feel like typically, at least from what I've seen, that's always been of Asian women. And this particular story was about men. And so it made me kind of think about, I was like, oh, well, is this like fetishizing men? Is it because they're queer? Does that mean it's not as bad in that way of fetishizing them? Or is it okay? I don't know. I just felt like it brought up a lot of questions
Yeah, no, it's really hard to straddle that inner morality when you're reading something private in your own home that you don't necessarily have to bring out into the light to anyone, and you have your own internal struggle. Like, do I really think Asian bodies are more attractive? Like, do I really think that, like, I don't know, like, I'm trying to think of accents that people think are probably, like,
the accents people think of.
Yeah, like accents or different colored bodies are more attractive, or like what are my own personal preferences that I don't have to speak into the world, that I don't have to put on a platform and problematize, right? But like, are my own preferences, right? Like, should we shame people for clicking on the Asian tab in Pornhub? Should we shame people for fetishizing, like, gay sex? I don't know. That's a really hard question. And I think the answer is yes, if you're putting it on a platform and dehumanizing them. And maybe the answer is no, if it's in your own personal household. And it just is what it is, right? It's really a tough question.
Thinking about like differences, like if you think about all of the different porn categories and how they relate to the way that different people are either marginalized or identify as, and you know, what is the differences between those, what is their proximity to whiteness in different ways, and how does that relate to how we represent them, and then how do those things trickle in? Like, how do we get from some awful Asian porn to Kill Bill? Like, what is the through line between those things? So I don't know, I just feel like there's a lot there, and it's something that I find to be a little bit difficult personally to talk about, just because I feel like I don't like to speak on experiences that are not my own personally, but it definitely, I think, is a worthwhile thing to consider in, or at least I was considering it while I was reading.
Something that I do want to talk about, and I don't think I've ever talked about it with literally anyone ever before in my entire life. It just never really come up. It's never come up. So
content.
You're hearing it now. You're hearing it now. So, like, fetishizing gay people. Like, straight women clinging on to gay people. The gay best friend, right? That is, like, a thing. It's a trope. Like, we can all agree that that's problematic to a degree, right? So me, like, who kind of identifies as, like, semi-queer, right? And I have a gay best friend, or I had a gay best friend. I have a gay best friend who loves RuPaul's Drag Race, who read Yaoi, who reads BL, who kind of went through a phase where she really liked reading gay fan fiction and like Carry On or the Captive Prince series, things like that. Kind of still enjoys that content as well. And I had to come to terms with things like fag hag exists, or fujoshi, rotten girl, exists. And how do I contend with that? Like, I don't understand how I fall in that spectrum. And it's something that I think about often.
Yeah, no, it's definitely very complicated. And I think I felt kind of similarly in different situations. And, you know, I think it's like a larger issue, really. Like, it's almost like not only is there like a specific issue of like women doing that and women latching on to gay people, but it just even like corporate America latching on. Like, I don't know how many like Target or like, I don't know. I feel like there's just so many commercials like last like Pride season.
Old Navy has RuPaul as their mascot right now.
Yeah, no, it's like, I feel like American corporations have latched onto that as well. And I don't know, it's definitely like an issue that I think is important to talk about. Like, I feel like that's something that I have kind of tried to talk about with my friends who are within the queer community, and being like, I want to support you, and we do have like similar interests, and I want to like enjoy things with you, but also I want to recognize that I am not also like with you on this journey. Like, I am not like in the same way of identifying as you. And so what is my place, and trying to decenter myself when it's like necessary and important to do that. I mean, even just simple as like going to Pride or going to like gay clubs, like what is like I often question like if it's like okay for me to be doing that, or if that's a space that is not meant for me. Because like for me personally, I feel like my own identity is like constantly shifting, and I don't feel like I necessarily like fit within any particular space. So I often feel like those spaces are not for me. So if anything, this might just like speak to my own like, what's the word? Neuroticism. But like I'll like ask people like if it's okay. Like I remember like I went with some of my friends to a club in New York, and I was like, hey, is this like okay? Because I feel like I know the history of like gay clubs and how they are like special sacred places, and I don't want to infringe on that. So I'm just going to ask if it's okay for me to go with you, because I am trying to think about these things critically. I'm not just trying to go and be that girl that just is like there on her bachelorette party being crazy. You know what I mean? So it's definitely very, very complicated.
Yeah. No, it's hard. It's really hard. And like, again, I identify as queer. It's hard to say out loud, right? But like, I don't know, does that excuse me? I really think about it all the time, you know what I mean? And I'm dating a straight man, and it's just very, very strange. It's very hard to feel myself and to not feel guilty, and to read books that are written by women who are meant for a straight audience, and I consume them and I like them, and then it just makes me confused. It's very hard, very, very challenging. And at the same time, like, should fag hags be demonized when everyone's doing it? I don't know. Like, I feel like it is the straight woman at the bachelorette party who is often picked apart, you know?
Yeah, I don't know. I think, well, first of all, I feel like whenever discussing an issue like this, for me, I feel like I can't say because I'm not the person who's offended. Whoever is the person who's offended about it, I think that they get the final say on whether or not something is okay. But I don't know. I think it's probably like the feelings that I think that we have about how this is a complicated issue. I think that probably more people feel that way, whether they realize it or not, to some extent, especially because we all know that sexuality is a spectrum. So I think that everybody is somewhere like considering these things, at least hopefully they are. And I think that we can't necessarily like immediately demonize the girl at the bachelorette party, but I think we can definitely hold like corporations accountable for like pink washing things, and even countries doing that, or just various problems to that extent, especially because those things are often used to then hide the real problems, like we mentioned before, like discrimination in housing, healthcare, stuff like that. We use the excuse of, oh, well, Old Navy loves gay people, so everything's fine. We don't have to worry about that other stuff. So, I don't know. It's difficult for sure.
It is difficult. It is difficult. And I mean, there's clearly a line, and it can be crossed, I'm sure. I'm sure it's been crossed many a times. Just I can't even say fetishizing. Excuse me. Okay, I'm just going to restart that. There's clearly a line, and it can be crossed, as in fetishizing Asian or gay people. But I hope that someone agrees with me that as long as I have this inner dialogue and I'm not just full force and putting it on a platform and saying that it's okay to dehumanize the LGBTQ community, and okay to dehumanize people that don't look like me for my own sexual gratification. I hope as long as I don't do that, it's okay.
Was there kind of anything more that you wanted to say around like feelings of maybe like shame or guilt and how that might relate to content like yaoi? in this instance?
Yeah, I think the concept of shame and guilty pleasure are kind of out of style. But I think there's still something to be said there because, again, like I said, the Japanese term fujoshi says rotten girl, meaning, that they're bad, that they should be ashamed of what they're consuming. And I mean, fujoshi is kind of been taken back by the community, right? Like it's kind of they, whatever brand themselves now, and it's kind of like reclaimed. But I mean, there was a point where it wasn't. And like, do we be loud and proud? Like, do we attend Yaoi Fest? Like, how... I don't know how to, like, navigate, like, if I'm just a casual fan of Yaoi, will I be rejected by the community? Or, like, should I just keep it to myself? Again, social consequences are hard to talk about when consuming something like this, where there are, like, hardcore fans. And the casual community is smaller than the hardcore community, I feel. Or at least it feels like that online.
I feel like it's kind of akin to, like, other things that people might feel, like, shame or have guilty pleasures of, which I think I agree that is out of style. I feel like, actually, that's been kind of, like, my thing recently of, like, telling people about why, like, shame is bad and we should not shame people and it is not productive. Shame is not good for our society, but that is a conversation for a later topic. But I guess, like, back to more so, like, whether or not people should feel, like, shame or guilt, even just in consuming, like, sexual content in general, I think the answer is no. I think that should just be widely accepted, but I mean, clearly we are not at a place like that in America, and I don't think that we're at a place like that in most countries. Even like I mentioned before, like in South Korea, like you had to be 19 years old in order to go see erotic paintings from the 1800s. Crazy. Like, so definitely I think we have a lot of room to grow in that regard.
Yeah, and I took like a sexuality class in my undergrad, and my professor was like an actual marriage therapist, and he just like taught on the side, and he brought in so many examples of how people have like gotten divorced or struggled with marriage just because one partner wanted to watch porn and the other one didn't, and they thought it was cheating. So that just blows my mind that people can think like that porn or reading something erotic is like cheating on your spouse or equivalent to cheating on your spouse.
I have hope that we are moving towards being a more sex positive society. I think that's yet to be seen in the mainstream still, but I don't know. I have hope for this generation that we're going to be moving in a better place, but I don't know. We'll just have to see.
Says the girl whose school tore out the sex education pages of our literal biology book. Of the next generation.
I'm talking about the next generation.
Oh, it makes me sad.
And that even wasn't us. That was our parents. Not our parents, but other parents.
Yeah.
And we live in a very
specific community. I don't know. People still think that way. I don't understand. I don't know. Do you think you can explain it to me? Like, if you were to be in their shoes, how someone would think that watching porn is cheating? Like, I sometimes see the perspective of a more conservative point of view, and I'm like, that makes sense. But this one, I'm really caught up in,
I don't know. I guess it would probably depend on, like, who is the party that thinks that. Like, if we're thinking about a heterosexual married couple, like, who is the person who's upset about it, and maybe then that might lead to why. Like, I would assume that maybe there'd be some level of insecurity there that is leading to that, whether insecurity in your own physical body or insecurity in just, like, the relationship in general. I don't know. I feel like a lot of it is just down to some, like, puritanical Protestant.
Yeah, even on my Facebook page
Yeah.
about 2 months ago, I saw a post reposted by two of my friends. Don't ask me why they're still my friends on Facebook. I think I like to keep updated on that sort of thing. But it was when the Cuties catastrophe, which was a controversial film that was on Netflix. It was literally like a whole diagram about how porn leads to converting into pedophiles. Like, it was a whole diagram. And I mean, like, I could believe my eyes. Like, of course they would think that. But at the same time, you know?
Yeah. I don't know, but then it's like, it is difficult because Pornhub just had their whole issue where they were having like underage people on there, and wasn't it like PayPal and people were revoking their services from Pornhub because of that? So yeah, there is like, I feel like it's difficult because I can see why there is clear issues, but I don't think often that the people who are feeling this way of like, if it's cheating or something, I don't think that they're thinking that deeply into it often. I mean, maybe they are, maybe some people are, but yeah, I don't know. I think we have a lot of shame ingrained in us in this society, unfortunately. But I think that there's a lot of like really great and interesting like companies and production companies and like just other sex positive organizations that I think are really trying to start like reframing that. And even I would think that something like Painter of the Night is like a step in a better direction than that, just because of the nature of how like accepting of the bodies. I honestly just feel like kind of like the more that we can see full naked bodies in society, we would be like in a better place. Like, if we could just have some type of exposure therapy for some people, maybe that would be good. I don't know. Maybe that's a crazy thought.
I think it is. I don't know. I recently got a breast reduction, and I was thinking about posting my boobs on Instagram, and I was like told by multiple friends to like not do that, because even when they post pictures of their faces on Instagram, like if they have like a book Instagram or a pet Instagram, whatever, like they get sexualized and DM'd because of that. So they were like, well, if you're going to do boobs, like private, So.
Yeah. I don't know. I think they're not wrong. Like, that definitely is true. It would just depend, I guess, on like how you're going to personally handle it, which is obviously not the right answer. Like, the people who would be saying those things are the ones who are the problem. They should learn not to like do that to people and harass people in that way. But obviously we don't live in a world that is like that, so we're stuck with having to decide what we're willing to put up with and how thick our skin is of how we're gonna handle things like that. So I don't know. If you would have asked me, I probably would have told you to do it.
Yeah, I know you would have told me to do it, but
personally.
Even on my recent dog Instagram, I don't know, already people are reaching out. It's weird.
Wait, did you just describe people as harassing as reaching out?
I wouldn't
and they are on the dog
say
Instagram.
They're harassing, but like, I don't know. I don't know, harassing is the correct word. I haven't responded, so maybe if I responded, it's irrelevant. Anyways, what is your final thoughts on Painter of the Night, just as in general? Like, did you like it? Will you continue reading? Just all the good stuff there.
I did like it. I thought, like, it was my first time ever reading something like that, and I definitely would read more of like the manhwa genre, and I think the format of reading on the phone. For this particular story, I don't know how much further I would like read into it, just because I think just plot wise I started to get like a little bored, but I don't think that the plot is probably the reason why people are like so into reading it. But maybe they are. I don't know. Maybe I just need to read further. But I think I probably would have, if I were to continue reading it, I would want there to be just more interesting lines along the plot. But it was definitely enjoyable. Like I said, I really liked the artwork. I thought that was really beautiful. I hadn't really seen anything like that before, so I definitely had an appreciation for that. And I felt like it was like fun to read. It was different, out of my normal wheelhouse. So yeah, what did you think?
I wish I liked it more. I honestly was not enthralled with it. Like, I didn't have like a ooh moment until it did the signature trope of when Nakyum got drunk and he mistook Master Yoon as his forever crush, which was his teacher. And he mistook him because he was so drunk and wasted, and he went to go kiss Master Yoon, and the chapter ended like that, and it ended with Master Yoon returning the kiss. Like, you could see the bit of tongue sticking out, and I was like, I felt like that one meme where like the guy's like grasping his head and he's on a roller coaster, I was like, oh, look at that, they did that, they did it. And it made me happy. And then after that, I continued reading for a bit longer. And the plot kind of went back to normal. And I know they're going to use that like as their kind of their gateway into the relationship. You can kind of see Yoon being a little bit more introspective of like being jealous of Nakyum and his relationship with his teacher, and you can kind of see that progressing a bit more, which I was intrigued by, but I don't think I'm going to continue reading. I don't know, I kind of have to think about it. Remember to like and subscribe, click the bell if you will, and be back for next time where we're going to be talking about what are we talking about, Savanah?
We are going to be talking about the Thomas Kincaid studio paintings of The Mandalorian.
Big yikes on that one. Well, I may have been the educator this time around. Savannah's going to have to teach me a few things this next time.
Yes, well, thank you guys so much for tuning in, and let us know if there's anything that you would like us to review or talk about in the future.
Bye!